evening, everyone, and welcome to this recording of the work of a wonderful artist from America, Professor Cynthia Hayes, who's been teaching art at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee for the last 20 years. It's a real pleasure to have her with us on Inspirare India, this little broadcast that we are trying to put together of our wonderful exhibition, which is called Eternal Visions, running now at the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture, KOLKATA. With me here is, of course, the painter, Professor Hayes, and may I introduce also the Secretary of Inspirare India, Dr. Pradipta Mukherjee, who is also here with us and who will be with me in trying to prize certain answers to the wonderful enigmas that lie engraved in Cynthia's paintings. A little word about Inspirare India to begin with. It's a new organization on the block, and we pride ourselves in promoting and encouraging and of course involving ourselves as well in this cycle of creativity that talks about collaboration between art forms, about cultural exchange, about pairing together the local and the international in terms of creativity. So, with these few words about our organization and about our project this evening, I will look in askance to the painter herself, Professor Hayes, and begin by asking her what was the inspiration behind this set or series of paintings?
Well, this series of paintings is really the result of a long evolution in process of my art. I consider myself primarily a very academic, figurative painter. My early paintings were figures and still life, and I began to include figurines, small statues, with other fruits and flowers and things of that nature. And after many years of painting things like that, I felt a desire for more beautiful sculpture, and maybe the sculpture was interesting me more and more. And I mean, flowers are beautiful, but they're, you know, how many flowers can you paint? So there was that. And also I was teaching figure drawing at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and I realized that the academic tradition of that was very European, Eurocentric, and I wanted to learn more about Asian art history so that I could present my students a more well-rounded, less European approach to the figure. So I started to take courses online from Oxford University in England, and that was a great experience. It was much more involved than I had ever imagined. Such a rich history, so many different traditions in the Indian sculpture. So I found it fascinating, and of course, I still have much to learn about the mythology, but I'm working at it. I'm trying to learn that. So
that's fantastic.
Just on that point, and since we are in the presence of the Lord Ganesha,
yes,
the Lord of all thresholds and good beginnings, what was the architectural piece that you studied for this particular painting?
This and many of the other sculptures that I've represented are in the Art Institute of Chicago in Illinois. In Illinois, they have a fabulous collection of Indian art. And so I spent a lot of time doing museum studies at the Art Institute of Chicago, which is about 2 hours south of my home. And this is based on one of those sculptures. This is based on a 4th century sandstone. And the actual sculpture is about this size. It's very small.
You had to enlarge it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
I did. Has 20 arms. So that was many little fingers to draw. It really took a very long time. Yes.
Cynthia, after going through your entire exhibition, it's really fascinating, it's amazing. I started feeling that you are almost working like an art historian. So, would you like to say something about this particular point of, working as an art historian on Indian sculptures, Indian mythology? If you would like to highlight on that angle?
Yeah, I do feel I'm focusing on the history. And I want the paintings to be accurate. I don't want to change anything or alter things. So it's, a study. I suppose this is still working in the Western tradition of doing studies of casts
But there
or
is a
sculpture.
wonderful fusion of Eastern and Western traditions in your painting. So that we found very, very interesting. This fusion of Eastern and Western tradition in your paintings.
Yes.
So-
One of the traditions, and this is maybe art history of the
Yes.
European art history. These are all, I think, very much related to a tradition called grisaille painting in French that is modeling and using all neutral colors of paint, gray, cream, black, brown, to create the illusion of a low relief sculpture. And that was frequently used in cathedrals to give the illusion of more columns and sculpture and things of that sort. So it is following a Western painting tradition in that way and focusing on the light and shadow.
What exactly is this material on which you have painted Lord Ganesha, this material?
Yes. This fabric is kalamkari,
Kalamkari, yeah.
hand-blocked fabric. And I came up with the idea of painting on fabric several years ago. I knew I was scheduled to have an exhibition at the Academy of Fine Arts here in Kolkata. And at that time I was painting very large oil paintings on stretched canvas. And it was cost prohibitive to try to ship these large paintings to India with me. And so as a result, I devised this idea of painting on fabric so that I'd be able to roll all the paintings.
And it becomes less heavy for you to
Yes.
carry all the way from the United States to India.
Right.
Yes.
And in fact, I brought this entire exhibition of, I think there's 32 pieces in this exhibition. I brought it all as one checked bag.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
It's quite lightweight then.
Yeah.
It's-
It was actually, I think,
Surprising.
28 pounds, something like that, for the whole
That's good.
exhibition.
Yes.
So I did have to, of course, have things framed once I arrived here. So there was some additional process with that. But
Cynthia,
Yes.
it's fascinating when Pradipta was asking that question. I find this in many of the paintings that you actually used the original design on the cloth. You've used that as extra kind of an embellishment in each one of your paintings. There's several other examples, and we'll go through all of them perhaps.
Yes.
So I find
Yes,
that
actually, what Devashish is trying to say, I would just like to add to that. This is the design on the fabric, and this design is still there.
It's very
It's
much
not
there.
entirely
Different-
washed out.
No.
It's not entirely erased. It is almost there, and on top of it, you have the Lord Ganesha sculpture embossed on it. So that makes it very fascinating.
you've used what you've already got as the material, so that also becomes a part of the of the painter's material that you have used, in addition to the acrylic paint and everything else. You've used the original design as something. And I was wondering, because you referred so much to European artistry and techniques being absolutely European, of studying casts, making studies of casts. But and you said that you had not attempted to do anything new or be inspired to reinterpret your reading of that architecture or of that piece of sculpture. But would you, now that you have paid obeisance to the European methods of being absolutely true to the original, would you now maybe, as a future project, consider taking that extra step as a painter yourself and putting your interpretation on the canvas as well, on the kalamkari as well?
An idea that I'm playing with. And maybe we see it a little in one painting in the next room, is adding more vibrant color. I don't know how much I would feel comfortable altering the image, especially because they are religious artifacts. And I'm very concerned that I don't want to alter the meaning or offend anyone with changing the
Well, Indian artists, especially
imagery.
the modern artists, have always done this. They have taken
Lots
M.F.
of
Hussein's-
liberties
yes.
with the interpretations
M.F.
of.
Hussain, Saraswati, or even with European paintings, like Rodin's Thinker, for example, another piece of sculpture which is used in one of his paintings called The Man. So they've always been doing that. So and of course you refer to religious sentiments. I don't think Hinduism is a religion; it's a way of life. So we're very tolerant about. I mean, it's only about these days that we have these problems cropping up. But I think we are a very liberal culture and religion, and any artistic interpretation would be most welcome.
We are open to all kinds of artistic
Absolutely. We have
interpretation.
always been
Hinduism is open to all kinds of
Yeah.
artistic interpretation.
India has been a very open and liberal country. We have accepted everything with wide arms.
Yes.
Open arms. So
Yes.
I think if you do come up with that, you would be most welcoming in our responses to more.
Okay. Well, that's
So could we?
Could we just move on to the
Yeah, the next
Saraswati
two, of
painting,
course.
because
And,
you just mentioned
Yes,
Saraswati.
the one that you were mentioning, especially about the color, of course.
Yeah.
The color, where you have used richer colors, deeper colors. So could you direct us to that
Yes.
particular painting?
The painting Saraswati is this piece.
Oh, this is amazing. I just find it brilliant, Cynthia.
And again, the use of the original kalamkari cloth.
And again, the original design of the kalamkari cloth is again
Incorporated.
revealed here.
Yes, yes.
It's not entirely erased. It's not entirely washed out.
It's been incorporated into
Yes.
the painting, and it adds to the painting.
Yes.
That is the.
Just focus this part and you see
Yeah,
it is
the-
there.
the
It's
halo.
done so innovatively. This
Yeah.
part is done so innovatively.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yes, I can probably point out a lot of little details that I'm glad to hear that you are observing that, because when I'm painting it, painting like this takes about a month's time. So I'm spending so much time looking at every little detail while I'm painting, and I think to myself, no one else will ever notice this, that I've done this. But there are a lot of coincidental things that do happen, which is, for me as an artist, the fun of playing with these patterns. Of course, you can see the different color here from the other painting. The color palette is very
It's
influenced.
almost terracotta, the color that you used here,
Yes.
especially the color here. It's almost terracotta.
Yes, the color
Have you done it
choices.
consciously, Cynthia? This use of terracotta, is it done consciously?
Yes, yes. The choice, there's several choices that happen as I'm creating these. Of course, I'm choosing fabrics that I think are beautiful and more subtle in color. I'm not buying fabrics that have really vibrant colors. But also, as I'm trying to imagine which sculpture I would like to paint on which fabric. Sometimes, as in this case, the actual sculpture has certain colors, so I look for a background that will be appropriate.
That would be suitable enough for the kind of painting you are actually drawing?
Yes.
Exactly.
So this actual sculpture had some of these terracotta colors and also had this patina. It was very unusual that it had so many different colors on the actual form. And the knees, especially I remember on the original stone, were very shiny, shiny black stone. But other parts of the sculpture had been maybe weathered by time and were not of the same surface as the knees were in that. So I liked this fabric. It had the blues and the reds and browns that I thought would work. But also, as you pointed out, this circle, the circle, I thought would work really well with this image. I think the actual sculpture had maybe an arched background, not exactly what we have here. And then in placing it, some very funny things. Maybe this was a little covered. The nose was the very, very center of the circle. But then, is this serendipity? Things fall into place. As maybe you pointed out, another circle just happened to fall along the brow bone, and another circle exactly under the lip. And it's almost like, as I'm painting, I start to notice these things. And it's, I don't know, is it coincidence or is that, sometimes I think divinity coming to play, where just things
that
are...
is inspired work. That is exactly inspired work, because, you even before perhaps you realize you have already seen it in your mind's eye. And you're painting, assuming certain things which you've seen in your mind's eye, certain impressions. So one look at the piece of cloth, one look at the actual sculpture, and there are certain formations in your mind already.
And I connect.
Yes, and when you actually see yourself doing it, then that's the later stage, I think. I think creativity comes at a stage before that, when you've actually seen it. The connections have already been made. A certain a warmth, a certain texture, a certain shade, color. I mean, you talked about light and shade. You've already seen that, and it's just now it's playing out in front of you. And as you're painting. So I think it's very similar to all artists. They see that prevision. You might almost call it a kind of prevision.
Yes.
This is so much there, because then it seems so instinctively that you'd all planned it beforehand, but I don't think it worked that way. It was just you were so
spontaneous.
Absolutely, and that comes out in the painting. That comes out in the painting.
The spontaneity is very much there.
We may spend hours talking about the deciphering of the painting, but when it did come, it came at one rush. Yes, it came like that. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I think we'll see it in the other paintings in this exhibition. The kind of patina structure that you have, the kind of palimpsest, layers. There's of course the design on the kalamkari, and then there is your painting, and then the mixture of the two of them. Everything coming together, so it's like building on layers. So
it's like building on layers, the palimpsest and the pastiche. Everything is there.
Everything's there, and it's a very traditional piece of work.
Yes.
It's also
and
very modern.
This interplay of palimpsest
It's
and
very modern
pastiche.
as well.
This interplay of palimpsest and pastiche that
Exactly.
makes it a very modern
A lot of
form
the
art.
European modernists had inscribed. I can think of Cézanne, for example, using classical sculpture in some of his, of course, as pastiche, as Pradipta points out, as pastiche. It's many of his paintings. So he keeps the forms, but he changes everything around it, and the way he incorporates that form in the larger context of the painting, it becomes a very modern interpretation of something more ancient, more complicated.
This is Goddess Saraswati in her modern incarnation.
Yes, and trust me, Pradipta will tell you as well that we are just on the cusp of Saraswati Puja. 22nd of January.
Yes. Saraswati Puja is on the 22nd of January.
So
this month.
right on the cusp.
We have it
of
only
Saraswati.
once a year, Saraswati Puja.
Yes.
So we are having it this year in the month of January, that is on the 22nd of January. We have Saraswati Puja. So here is Goddess
Yes, so
Saraswati.
this is our advanced Saraswati Puja celebrations, you might call it.
Yes.
And what better way to celebrate the goddess than by paying tribute through art, of course. She's the goddess. She's our only muse, one and only muse. All 10 muses rolled into one. She's one, 10 in one kind of for all of us. You know.
She's inspiration for everything.
Every artist, every creative person here. So it's great that we discuss your painting of Lord Goddess Saraswati. And can we move on, Cynthia?
Yes.
To the next painting. So there's such wonderful.
Paintings.
Okay.
So, can we talk a bit about this painting? I think the best way we can is to start with Cynthia, who would want to, talk about this painting,
Yes,
what actually inspired you to this painting, Mother Goddess Brahmini. So we would like to know the source of this painting.
Source?
Yes.
Well, nearly all the sculptures represented in this room are items in the Art Institute of Chicago's collection.
Illinois? Did you
In
mention?
Illinois,
Yes.
Art Institute of Chicago, Illinois. And sometimes it's hard to put into words why certain objects draw me. I mean, they have so many, but you stop and you go, well, that's very interesting, unusual. Of course, as a mother, maybe I found the idea of this goddess interesting, appealing to me.
Yes. So,
It's a rather, I consider this a more simple painting than many of the others in the exhibition. But
Simple in terms of technique, you mean?
maybe so.
the
Do you have a specific
expression-
question?
No, I just wanted to ask the expression in her eyes, the goddess, the way she is looking, slanting, is there any specific reason why the eyeballs are, slanted in a particular direction towards her right? I mean, is she looking at something or she's anticipating something? Or is it just off the cuff?
Yeah, I think it's just
Off the cuff.
Because I think these are not stone eyes. These are living human
you
eyes.
think that they read as
Absolutely,
one?
they're living. There's something on the right where I'm standing of
Oh,
the figures
you
right.
think that she's
She's
looking?
looking sideways, sidelong.
She's
It's a
looking
side look around.
sideways. You see, her eyeballs are pointing sideways.
Maybe she's
And,
trying to keep an eye on what her children are doing.
Maybe. Quite possibly. A mother always has to.
Yes.
I think, and that there's this wry smile.
Wry smile, I wish
Playing
I
out on her
also came across and wanted to
So you have your art has really softened stone into something much more human, much more human.
emotional. Something
Yes, of course. The eyes, the smile, because stone is has a certain, very.
Yes, but the expression here is not stony, Cynthia. You see,
Yes.
It's softened.
It's
It's
softened,
actually a face now.
toned down, and
It's not a sculpture anymore.
it speaks. Actually, the
Yeah, of course.
the eyes speak.
Yeah.
So.
And
Thank you.
and it kind of forces the visitor, whoever is looking at this painting, to kind of stand here and meet her gaze, which is a curious angle, very anamorphic kind of thing.
Do you realize
It's not front on.
it is very difficult to meet her gaze. You really don't know.
Unless, of course, you're standing where I'm standing. Hello. It's sidelong
She's
look.
looking to the.
Yeah, so it's a classic kind of, I think, in certain Renaissance paintings, in the European tradition, you have this anamorphic thing, about looking sideways, ignoring the visitor's gaze and looking sideways, the figure looking
As
sideways.
Devashish pointed out, I'm really interested in Mother Brahmini's gaze in this painting.
So yes, all her eyes, in all her faces and avatars or the three heads, they have a language in them, which is, as I said, in stone, it's like it's a deadpan expression. It's like something cast in stone. Of course, the expression goes like that. This is not stone.
This is not stone, this is lively.
And even her
This
eyelashes.
is communicating.
You can almost
much to us.
see the eyelashes, you know. You can almost see the eyelashes. You know.
The quiver, almost the quiver.
Yes,
right?
yes, of course. Yes, of course. So
This is
I think Cynthia is very modest in putting it that
This
was
is a very
simplest-
simple painting of hers,
So
and we could interpret much in it.
much more
So-
indeed. So
Well, what I'm hearing, I mean, it's very, very interesting to me. I think all the many years I spent drawing from live models maybe has some influence in
Okay.
what is happening.
Mhm.
That perhaps as I'm working, I'm remembering drawing flesh more
Yes.
than stone.
Mhm.
Yeah.
from the statues to the human, that little, but then very significant journey. It's so difficult for many artists to make, and I think you have made it so wonderfully.
Thank you.
And you've located all that in the heart of a very traditional, tribute that you've paid to the traditional ways of Indian art. But I think you have interceded your own creativity somewhere at the heart of it. This is one of the principal paintings that talk about that represent that. So it's not just, as I said, it's just not studies of works of art which have been done thousands of years ago in India, but you are interceding your own creativity, you're locating yourself in the midst of all that, and turning it into something much more,
That we can relate to.
of course, vibrant, modern,
Yes.
very located, relatable, in the current context. So as I said,
So let's move on.
the
to
Brahmani looks at all of us.
Do you think, of course, any artist can't help but change the image, right? You see it, it comes in, and somehow it gets
Yeah,
mixed with all your past
of course.
experiences,
Mhm.
and then you put it
Yeah.
out onto
Because
the
I am
canvas.
looking at the painting from my subject position. So my subject position determines the way I am reading this painting, I am interpreting this visual text.
Mhm.
So it is my subject position which is actually helping me to interpret this work of art. So
Mhm.
The same applies to the artist. Of
Yes.
course, the artist filters it through his or her own
Yes.
imagination, experience,
Mhm.
and technical upbringing, etc., and all the factors involved. And what comes out is not the true copy of the original, but absolutely original copy of something else, quite something different,
Yes.
the original. So it is the Brahmani goddess, the mother goddess, but it is also something uniquely yours, I think, that you have created. It has all the visual signatures of Indian art in it, which helps us
Mother Goddess, it always has had a very powerful symbol.
of course.
If you go to Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, you
The
see
early
the Mother
civilizations.
Goddess, the early civilization, the Mother Goddess. So we were actually interested when we stood here and observed the Mother Goddess through the way you have interpreted the Mother Goddess.
It's one of the fundamental entry points into maybe Indian culture, to look at the cult of the mother, in all its different variations down the ages, and how we have looked at mother goddesses and mother goddess figures. So it's very interesting that you've chosen one of these particular pieces of sculpture to base your painting on. So can we move now to
Other sculptures, before we move on to the designs,
Yeah.
just finish the
the
sculptures.
sculptures? I
first.
think there is one here, of course.
Okay, so,
Ardhanarishwar.
Ardhanarishwar, I think viewers should like Ardhanarishwar.
No, it's then let's first hear Cynthia's story, about this particular painting, and
Well,
the technical and other aspects of it. How you came about
yes.
choosing this first of all.
Oh, well, I had been unfamiliar with this form of Shiva, and I thought it was fascinating and very unlike anything that I had seen previously, with the figure divided in half down the center, male and female. So I was intrigued and wanted to study that further. And part of the process of painting is very much a sort of meditation, right? Really learning, every aspect of focusing on these things. Coloristically, also, the actual object was very interesting to me. That it had sort of this rusty brown golden stains on the gray stone, and that residue of time I found fascinating in that object as well. So that added to my selection of that object as
Have you added these designs to the original fabric, Cynthia, these designs?
Yes, I've added in many of these paintings different designs that I've stenciled onto the fabric. When you were mentioning layers, it's adding just another layer. And sometimes I'm using the stencils as specific, say, ornamentation on the figures, but other times it's maybe to give an aura, atmosphere,
Right.
like a halo or something.
Instead of a halo, you have this. Again, I mean, this is wonderful. I mean, you talked about the aging of stone and the different patinas and the different textures that you have worked with. You've tried to work it back onto the cloth, which is something of organic stone, but you've tried to do that over here. And I find it fascinating. For example, instead of the missing halo, you put on these designs. But even then, the color and the aging of that color, the way in which you put it on that canvas, it's about this stains or the weather-beaten kind of the character that you're trying to add to it. That I find absolutely fascinating, actually.
Thank you.
And the contrast that is achieved between all the paintings here, on the one hand, the freshness and the power of the message, and on the other hand, the aging of the stone, the organicity that you confer upon these paintings, trying to capture as much as possible the age and the weather-beaten nature of those images, So that contrast is brilliant, actually.
And this original, design here acts as an embellishment.
Absolutely, right through the body, as you can
look
see.
at the way this is brilliantly done here.
And all of this.
Here, everywhere. I mean, that's brilliant.
Thank you.
In
Yes,
a grey stone sculpture,
I
the color
I
seeps in.
do like these in the drapery as well.
Yes, and the curves here. Yeah.
Sometimes also I'm working with the border as the ground plane.
Yeah.
The border is the ground plane.
Because if it's basalt or granite, you would have a little bit of the white thing, when it grows granular over a period of time.
Yes.
So, the whites that you've applied over here, this kind of a salt-like thing, it's on which the sand or salt or whatever, that is exactly what you get, when it's Stone Ages. And you find in many of these ancient sculptures, there's a kind of a white thing spearing out of the black rock. It's a kind of a pattern inside.
Dust.
Yeah, basalt dust,
Salt
granite
dust or granite dust.
So that's exactly what you have.
This part.
So,
Yes.
just the sheer authenticity and the detail of it all, and of course the overall addition that it makes to the effect of the painting. I find that quite fascinating.
It's
Absolutely.
fascinating. So, Devashish, can we now just move on to
Yes.
the dancing Shiva image of hers? Because we talked about Ardhanarishwar.
Yes.
Do you have the dancing Shiva painting with me, Cynthia?
There's one in the other room.
Just show me his card, Devashish. This one. This one. Dancing Shiva.
Yes. Yes,
Yep.
it's in the other room.
Oh, okay. It's in the other room.
Yes.
Of course,
So-
we will do that.
We will do that. Okay.
But
So
let us come to these designs, which
Designs,
also
yes.
fascinated me
Yes.
again. Cynthia, I mean, again, if you could expand
these
first.
flower
on-
vases and the flowers. So.
You call it the inner garden.
Yes.
Is it just because it's surrounded by the design and there's this panel of flowering plants.
Cynthia, when
Yes.
we started this interview, you remember you talked about still lives.
Yeah.
So when,
Yes.
So is it from your experience of drawing and painting these still lives that you have actually matured into this kind of painting?
It's a very good question, Cynthia.
This is a very good question because I don't know if I had even realized myself that the way these vases are sitting on the ledge is very much the same viewpoint from which I would paint my still life 20 years back, which was unusual. Usually people would take a higher viewpoint, and it was very low with eye level right at the tabletop. It's so interesting. These two pieces, and actually there are two other paintings in the other room, are a newer direction that I'm working on a specific project. It's called the Look Here Project. The university where I teach has a wonderful library, special collections, and digital collections. And they put out a call for artists to do some sort of collaborative work inspired by an item in the library collection. And after doing some research, I found we had, I think, 3 or 4 volumes of a 10-volume set, I believe it is, of these rare giant books from India from the 1800s called the Jaipur Portfolio of Architectural Renderings.
Okay.
And the amount of detail in these drawings was so inspiring and incredible. And so I proposed a project that would incorporate aspects of elements in those illustrations. And so these two paintings were inspired by some of those architectural relief panels, but also there's something different happening than I think in the figurative pieces, in that there's a progression happening where it's almost dissolving, and then in the companion piece, the image is much more falling apart.
The images are falling apart, exactly. It begins right here and it continues there.
It's almost as if the borders have invaded the center in this particular, you see, you've used more of
things
the
are sliding down into
it
the picture.
It seems that you've used more of the original design over here, whereas this is largely more of a painted section. I mean, it does figure here, I think, somewhere in the background, but this is more of decidedly painted. And you talked about this wonderful collection that you could consult and you could research.
Jaipur
Portfolio, yes. But
yes.
one glance at it, and I am recollecting 2 things, of course, both of course from India, Indian tradition. One of course is the productions that came out of book jackets and you might say especially the design on the Quran, which were being done in Mughal court, in the Tasveer Khana. It's called where the painters work, it's called the Tasveer Khana. Tasveer meaning picture, of course. Tasveer Khana. So the Tasveer Khana model was very reminiscent of the 2 paintings, the two frames that we have here, right here. Very much the design that you talked about, the intricacy of the design, the layers that you talked about. And of course, the second is that there is this great Indian modernist again, Ghulam Mohammad Sheikh. Ghulam Mohammad, I mean, your panels look exactly something out of Ghulam Mohammad Sheikh. I mean, I'm quite sure that you're not quite acquainted with his work, but you're just working with your own inspirations. But this is how 2 artists working in completely different traditions, with completely different motives perhaps even, can come and walk the same path. So because immediately as I stand in front of this, certain panels, certain designs, certain motifs out of Ghulam Mohammad Sheikh. immediately flashed past my mind.
Oh.
Absolutely. So here is a modern Indian master on the one hand.
So probably you put forward some of Ghulam Muhammad
Yes,
Sheikh
of course.
to
Of course.
Cynthia, so she would
I would be most happy to do that. But then, on the one hand, you have an Indian modernist who is using these designs which are apparently at cross purposes, but then they form panels. You know, you talked about the inner garden, so one inside the other. So there's this playing with how this plays off what is beyond it. You know, the kind of playing off the floral designs, the still lives that you have painted here in a panel, reacting to other flowers and floral renditions, you know, in the borders of the original cloth, perhaps. So, you know, again, a very strategic use that you've made. So, again, on the one hand, I'm reminded of Mughal paintings, and especially their designs for the Quran, the kind of wonderful designs they came up with. Miniature paintings, of course, you know, in the Indian tradition, and then, of course, Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh and his work. Because his work was also based on what you were suggesting, the different panels. He said that I'm both modern and ancient, he said that. So, you know, it's like somewhere I might have something from the ancient Indian pieces, maybe it's a bit of sculpture. On the other hand, I could have something very modern, maybe cityscapes surrounding it somewhere. Yes. So I can use so many different things in one painting, making the painting deep. We talked about the deep painting. So I think there's a wonderful depth emerging here in these designs, which is very different from the other figure drawings that figure paintings that we are seeing. But these two, they are kind in itself. You know, it's a wonderful way in which you've outlined and you've enlightened us, and you've related to our traditions and our ideas, of course. So we find it fascinating, and especially with Inspirare India. We are again, we're again so happy to have you here on board to talk on art in this art gallery, in this wonderful Ramakrishna Mission Center of Culture art gallery. And so can we
just
move on to some of the others? I think there are some very impressive pieces of work here. Cynthia, before you hold forth on these paintings, I find that the two rivers, Ganga and Yamuna, have been very important, subjects which you have tackled. One, of course, has singular figures. On the other side, we'll visit that. And then these little tributary figures, you know.
I have done two diptychs. This is one diptych, and the other is, of course, on the other side of the wall. Done two years apart, and I think you'll see those have a different look. Maybe the process
These are the older ones?
has evolved. These are the older ones. And it has a more limited color palette. But yes, there is something that I thought was very interesting here, is that there are multiple figures, and that I think was rare in most of the other objects that I had studied. And very unusual how the size of the figures changes. I think there's a hierarchy of importance being shown here in the scale of the images.
Because she is the river goddess Yamuna.
Yes.
And we are the attendants of the river goddess Yamuna.
Yes.
Maybe tributaries, maybe retinue, whichever way we want to interpret, I guess.
Maybe the tributaries is
Possible.
one way of interpreting them, yes. Because
So this is the entire river cycle, like the other one,
This
with
is
the Ganga.
River Ganga.
Yeah. So that's the entire river cycle. So it's not just one river, it's this cycle of rivers. And it's very interesting, you know, one's facing this way, one's facing the other.
Often these actual artifacts were very separated. The other diptych we'll see are very similar arrangements of figures. Frequently, these goddesses were on two sides of a gate or an arch. And I think they were always designed to face the center of the door. So
it's almost together the diptych is almost like a kind of gateway into India, perhaps, you know. through our rivers, because of course, India is navigable through our rivers. So, and India was a very riverine culture those days, ancient India, of course, and still is. And lots of our cultural practices have to do with rivers, even today, in everyday rituals and ceremonies. The river is very important still. So we can see exactly. It seems, Cynthia, that you've been hitting, I mean, a lot of people have tried to size up India, you know, tried to gauge and guess and interpret what India is all about, has been, will be. But I think with your artistic language, with your very imaginative forays into the world of Indian architecture and sculpture, and then of course your interpretations of it, I think you've given us a better idea or a better rendition of what India really was, and an appreciation of the values that we actually had at that time, and cultural and otherwise. I think than many a Western artist or academic in the past. Because you've touched on the real nerve that we are a riverine culture. You know, in the other paintings that we did, you touched upon the tonic nature of our gods and goddesses with the Ardhanarishwar avatar and all that. But here you've touched a wonderful nerve of our nation, that we are a nation of rivers.
Maybe I would just like to ask Cynthia, that have you come across our religious text Mahabharata? Because if you must have come across our religious text Mahabharata, because in Mahabharata, this river goddess Ganga that you have depicted here so beautifully, she is a character in Mahabharata, and she actually contributes a lot to the happenings of the narrative of that epic Mahabharata. So I was reminded of Mahabharata after I saw this painting of yours.
And Pradipta is quite right that Mahabharata and Ramayana are foundational epics of India. These epics actually talk about who we are, where we came from, it's about our origins, our basis. And by choosing to paint the two rivers, the principal rivers of India.
Yes, the source, Ganga is the source
absolutely,
river. Yeah.
So by choosing to paint that in these two diptychs, these two sides of the wall, I think you've hit one of the principal, let's say, nerve ends of our civilization. It's fascinating that you can see it as that. I mean, it's wonderful, for us as Indians standing here, in your presence.
And perhaps I was right when I started off with the question that, Cynthia, do you look at yourself as an art historian?
Yeah.
So we know actually why Cynthia is an art historian.
With a wonderful field of imagination at her disposal, of course, as well.
Yes.
So she can take that to another level. Art history can sometimes be limiting, but you have gone well beyond that. You've been able to transcend the limitations of art history. The artist in you has come out, I think. It has defeated the art historian and the artist has triumphed. I think we are so happy that has happened. So, because in many cases it's about an unequal contest and the artist losing out to the art historian, but it has not happened with you. Taken that next step. So can we go to the other side of this particular diptych?
So the diptych on the other side.
The other side of the diptych.
Was the other side of the wall, that diptych, was a much more limited palette. I think I had mentioned previously that a future direction might be adding more vibrant color. And this is perhaps my first experiment into that concept. The figures are still rather neutral, but I've started to add more color to the environment around these figures.
The background is much more colorful in these paintings.
Yes.
The background.
Right, I've added much more color to the background. Partly, this fabric had influence in that as well. This fabric had much more white color than the other fabrics I had used, and it was too new looking, too bright. First I tried to stain it with tea. I boiled the fabric in tea, and that helped to age it a little bit, to give it that, again, weathered, aged look. But it called for more color, and thinking of the water and the sky, I gave these, I think, a different environment than what we see in the other paintings in this exhibition.
I think that is as well is quite a wonderful extension that you've made to your work, because you sound a little apologetic for the colorful nature of these particular canvases, but I think you should not be, because you have been very truthful to, on the other side, the other diptych about the two rivers, to the original character and patina and actual representation of that piece of sculpture. Here, probably what we were talking about earlier on, I mean, you're talking about taking that little extra step, that artistic liberty, to kind of move it on, not tampering with the actual sculptures, but then again, making such changes whereby you can change its context perhaps, and thereby alter its meaning a little bit, making it more colorful as a background. I can always see saffrons and greens, of course, the national flag, the colors of the national flag. Immediately, as you look at the color, for an Indian association comes around. So with the whites and the saffrons and the greens, again, probably did not intend that, but it comes around. It's a slightly different interpretation that also one might make of these very traditional figures, the way in which you located them, in this one. I mean, with less of an accent on actually aging them and preserving their original visual character. It seems that you are trying to play a little bit with what one might achieve by trying to change a little bit perhaps, make the stone a little bit more flowing, as you can see with the brush strokes there, up there perhaps, So maybe integrated more with the fabric perhaps. So I think what I'm seeing here is this next step that we've been always talking about,
Yes.
and which you've taken wonderfully. There's nothing to be very apologetic about it, but it's actually so wonderful that we.
It's actually very wonderful.
Yeah. So it's so different from the figures on the other side.
Yes.
So.
So you can see the evolution in 2 years, what has happened.
Yes. So this is wonderful. To almost see you evolve as an artist as well. In a matter of 2 diptychs, you can actually find her evolution as an artist.
Actually, it strikes me is the backgrounds which she has made so very colorful. The first thing that did strike me was the background here, so different from the background in that part of the diptych. So yes. That is brilliant.
Cynthia, this may be a good moment to ask you a question I've been dying to ask you right through. The thing is that since we are at Inspirare India, all about artistic exchange and collaboration, and
collaboration between sister art forms.
Of course, the artistic languages, and you're doing it so wonderfully. I wanted to just ask you, going forward, maybe casting your eyes onto the future perhaps, do you see yourself working with Indian texts perhaps, sacred or secular, and as a painter trying to interpret your visions out of those texts, and maybe offer us another series of wonderful paintings perhaps?
As far as working with writing, I've thought maybe a little bit more about doing some collaboration with poets, and perhaps doing some painting based on contemporary poetry on this sort of subject matter, but also then maybe inviting poets to add a poem to exhibit along with the artwork.
These are the things which we have also visualized.
Yes.
When we were actually forming Inspirare India, these are the things we have regularly talked about, me and Devashish. Because Devashish is a practicing poet. Yes, and So he has written two collections of poetry. One is First Will and Testament, which is his first collection of poetry, and second is Waiting Like Departure, which is his second
There's a
collection.
third coming,
Third is
and I don't want you to talk much about that. So that's a little bit of suspense. Let's put it this way. It's coming, but it's coming very
I'll
much.
look
So
forward
he
to
is an
seeing
Indian
that.
poet writing in English.
I write in
Indian
English,
poet
yes,
writing
yes,
in
yes.
English.
So it's very fascinating that you talk about these possible exchanges projects that you have in your mind.
The exchange that you mentioned just now, the poetry and painting.
Yeah.
You know,
Then that's a very frequent one,
interrelation of
perhaps.
poetry and painting.
And may I maybe request you to keep Inspirare India in mind whenever you think of a project,
Yes,
something
please do keep Inspirare
becomes more
India in
concrete in your mind, please do think of us, and we'll be most happy to collaborate with you and work with you on that
Yes.
project. So can we move on
Move
now
on to the next
to the
room,
next
please.
room? Yeah. This
So,
one.
This has a companion panel on the other side of the room as well. These are other pieces that were for that Jaipur portfolio project. So the subject matter again is a little different. And I liked the idea of these two images in particular. I felt this showed the peaceful side of nature, and perhaps the other side is a more aggressive take on the natural world. These I altered, maybe adding more color as well, a natural indigo dye in this gradation across the pieces. And I thought long about adding these panels, top and bottom, which is unusual compared to these other pieces, because I really felt I needed to add more color to these images specifically. And I think that the gold helped bring out some of the golden colors that were in the original fabric.
Did you, are these your original designs? I mean, did you base it on?
These are based on some low relief carvings that were represented in that portfolio of architectural detail.
Right, right. Because it reminds me principally of Madhubani paintings. The denseness and then the intricacy of the work. It
Yes.
reminds me of a lot of the Madhubani paintings, the Madhubani style.
Madhubani paintings,
Yes.
right?
So it's again.
The borders are very
Yeah, yeah,
important in those
yeah,
images.
very
yes.
much so, very much so.
Yes. In fact, I have a collection of those on the walls in my home.
Oh, wow.
And I have been looking at those
So,
quite
so it's no longer something US. It's very Indian. Then you put them on the wall, and it will transform your home. It's a little India out there. I mean, and you have India at your heart. India at heart. So it's each one of your paintings is not just a foreign culture that you have tried your best to kind of technically assimilate,
Yeah.
but it's something that is yours. It's
Something
India's.
which you have made your very own.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So you may
And
be,
we appreciate that.
so you may come and go from India, but India has already made a home in your heart. I think it reflects in your heart.
You have made India your very own.
Absolutely. So,
Thank you.
so whenever you take up your brush, you do something of this, and that spirit comes through, and it's evident in each one of these paintings, each one of these canvases, these pieces of kalamkari, the designs that you have wonderfully described. So, trying to, I think, we're at the fag end, I think. This is one.
This is
This is a Debbie mirror.
the mirror. Okay.
Yes. It's wonderful. And this
And
is
I
the,
wanted to talk about the dancing Shiva.
I think this is the one.
Is this the dancing Shiva
Yes.
painting?
These two figures are in the Indian Museum in Kolkata.
Okay.
Two sides of a column.
Okay.
Can I ask you
Yes.
one very basic question,
Yes.
Cynthia? Because we know of Lord Shiva as a male god,
Yes.
but then the depiction of
This
Lord
is
Shiva is here
obviously
like a
female.
feminine
Yes.
presence. So,
Yes.
could you just tell us why this kind of depiction?
This has brought on many interesting conversations I've had with people in the gallery.
I was part of one at least.
And someone was sure to point out that there is a suggestion of the third eye. And
Third eye.
Third eye.
Third.
And was saying, well, that is definitely Shiva.
Mm-hmm.
But here, maybe the translation is different rather than being
Cynthia,
half female.
have you drawn this, or it was originally there in the fabric? This one. It is like a third eye. I mean, is it drawn? Is it painted, or is it there in the?
Well, there is the shape is.
Oh, the shape was there
No,
already.
no,
You have shaped it.
I've shaped
Yeah.
it that
There
way.
is a.
But it's very subtle.
Yeah.
Very subtle,
Yes.
yes, but it's very interesting. If you look at it as the third eye, then. then
I mean,
of course it's
also
Lord
looking
Shiva.
at the weapon
But
that
then
she's
I was
carrying.
taken aback by the way you have depicted this male god, Lord Shiva, in his. It's a kind of a feminine, presence
Probably
here.
Shivani or Parvati.
So, were you
Including
thinking of
both sides?
No, but Parvati being of course, the spouse of Lord
spouse of
Shiva.
Lord Shiva?
Yes.
She's also, I mean, she's been visualized
We
as
have never
Durga.
come
And,
across a painting of Lord Shiva or any image or sculpture of Lord Shiva where he is projected in his feminine,
Avatar, kind
of.
avatar, whatever. So this was something which actually made us think what exactly inspired you to depict Lord Shiva in this form.
so maybe were you taking a kind of, in your own mind, a logical step from the Ardhanarishwar that you had already painted to the next step?
I haven't changed any
It's
aspect of
already
this
there as
sculpture.
depicted.
Yes. And I am going on faith that the
This is from
labels.
Indian
yes,
Museum?
and I'm going on faith that the labeling was correct on the objects themselves.
Alright.
But someone was saying, well, Shiva can be anything.
Mm.
If he would want to take female form.
Yes, of course. I mean, and that's the beauty about India.
Yes.
That a lot of things which you think would be very rigid in the West in terms of interpretation is very loose.
Very fluid,
And
these
loose.
notions of
So-
a male god, a female goddess,
So
these
the
notions
tonic
are
is
very
very
fluid.
natural to India.
So,
That
a
you
male
can-
god can take the form of a female goddess.
Absolutely.
A female goddess can take the form of a demon. Yes, a Rakshas. I mean, it depends.
It's
like,
very fluid.
It's very fluid.
And therefore,
The-
your
the-
interpretation can be fluid as
particularly,
well.
because these bodily figurations, the corporeality of the body,
Yeah.
these dimensions are very fluid as far as Indian art, Indian mythology, Indian history is concerned. It is all very
So if you're
fluid.
working in the Indian tradition, I mean, you need not fear the rigidity of an interpretation. You can, of course, intercede.
It's a
your
lot
own-
of flexibility because
Very much.
gods, they keep changing, switching from one form to the other.
Shape-shifting gods. There are
Yeah.
too many of them.
And most
Over
of
here.
the times we find the demons, they are taking the time
Yes.
to, imitate the
Yes.
goddess
Yeah.
to look beautiful. So,
Then that's also there. That's also there. So between a goddess and a joki, there's not much of a difference there.
yeah.
But yes, she is holding the weapons.
Yes, and that's another thing.
Some attributes.
Yeah,
right?
it's kind of the trident. It's not really, but it's kind of the trident, more or less. It's not the trishul as we call it, but somewhere close to that. But then that's tremendously interesting. Cynthia, I mean, before we wind up, I
But
think
then Lord
Yeah.
Shiva will not have
the crown.
the crown
His
because
crown.
he has that
Yeah,
hair
he's
tied
got
up
crown,
in a
yes.
knot.
Tied in a knot.
Hair is usually when you see Lord Shiva, his hair is tied up in a knot because that is the source of the river Ganga.
Yeah.
Shiva's hair, the knot is the source of river Ganga. So we are slightly,
There is a correspondence between Western myth and Eastern myth. Minerva was born by fracturing the skull of Zeus. We know that.
Yes.
Of course, from Shiva's skull emanates Ganga, as she says. So it's interesting.
Here we have
parallel.
Lord Shiva wearing the crown. So this is
Yeah.
different, but then
So, It
this
would
is
have really helped if we would have known the actual origin of where this sculpture came from, which tradition in India. Because many traditions they interpret the sacred text differently. You know. So this might be one of those divergent interpretations, perhaps. Perhaps it might.
But then we are always open. We are such a culture which
Absolutely.
is open to all
And
kinds of divergent interpretations.
For me, Pradipta, this is not something from 5th century India. This is something done by Cynthia Hayes. So, yeah.
And maybe from a 21st century perspective.
Absolutely.
So,
I wanted to wind up before I just a very small question, Cynthia, because
Yes.
I've read a little bit about your spiritual immersion, and I think which goes behind. I mean, there's a kind of a backdrop to all the artwork that you do. Is your belief, is your immersion, and especially I think Buddhist religious texts and culture.
Yes.
So could you finally say a few words about that?
I do consider myself Buddhist, and I've spent some time traveling Bhutan and Thailand to study Buddhist art and art history. There are several Buddhist images that we haven't
Tirthankara. Yeah.
looked at. And I had mentioned I do feel very much that the process is partly meditation for me as I work. Something else, though, that I'm very involved with in the States is Indian classical music. I volunteer for an Indian classical music school in Milwaukee, Hindol Majumdar School of Music and Dance. And so I've become very interested in the classical music as well. And I'm finding there's a connection to the classical arts of the sculpture and painting and music and spirituality. It all is so connected here. So I find that beautiful.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for your time.
thank you so much, Cynthia. Thank you on behalf of Inspirare India. And we really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for coming to India, sharing your paintings, sharing your work of art with us. It was lovely meeting you, and this is absolutely fascinating. This entire world of painting is absolutely
seriously hope this is just the
fascinating.
beginning of many good things to come. The many exchanges, many projects that we might achieve together. Because your creativity
And
fascinates
we are
us.
looking forward to more collaborative projects with
Absolutely.
Inspirare India and Cynthia Hayes on board. So
Thank you very
let's
much.
and we wish you a very happy journey to the United States.
Thank you.
Safe journey, and yes, we'll be in touch, and we'll be hopefully involved in more things. Maybe in Calcutta, maybe in the US.
Okay, that
Thank
would be
you.
wonderful.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia.
Thank you.